In a world drowning in acquisition and mindless yes, your most powerful weapon is refusal. What you reject defines you far more sharply than what you embrace. The masses chase shiny objects and validation. You don't have to. Drawing that line isn't just rebellion, it's the ultimate act of self-definition. Jung knew this when he talked about individuation. The path to becoming who you truly are runs directly through what you're willing to walk away from. Don't tell me what you want. Tell me what you refuse to accept. That's where I'll find who you really are. Jung recognized that the path to selfhood involves a careful process of selection and rejection. The authentic self emerges not merely through what it accepts, but through what it consciously refuses. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. This becoming requires discrimination, the ability to distinguish between what serves your deeper purpose and what merely satisfies fleeting desires or social expectations. Consider how society bombards us with opportunities for mindless consumption, superficial connection, and endless distraction. Those who cannot refuse these offerings become indistinguishable from the collective, their identity consumed by the very things they consume. The person who says yes to everything becomes nothing in particular, but the one who selectively refuses, who declines what others desperately chase, develops a distinct shape, a defined character that stands apart from the formless crowd. Boundaries are not merely protective, they are creative. They don't just shield us from harm, they define what we are. Like a sculptor who creates not by adding material but by strategically removing it, we craft ourselves through what we eliminate, what we say no to. Each refusal carves away what is not truly us, revealing the authentic form beneath. Jung understood that this process of boundary setting is essential to psychological health. Without it, we become vulnerable to what he called psychic inflation, the dangerous state where the ego identifies too strongly with collective values or archetypal energies, losing its proper limits. The person who cannot say no to social demands, who cannot refuse the siren call of collective obsessions, risks drowning in forces larger than themselves. The most terrifying thing, observed Jung, is to accept oneself completely. This acceptance includes recognizing our limitations, understanding that to be someone specific, we cannot be everything. We cannot say yes to all possibilities without becoming diluted, formless, and ultimately powerless. One of the most counterintuitive truths about human psychology is that respect flows not toward those who accommodate, but toward those who refuse. The person who sets clear boundaries, who demonstrates the courage to say no when others cave to pressure, commands a natural authority that no amount of people-pleasing can achieve. We intuitively understand this dynamic. Think of someone you deeply respect. Do they bend to every request? Do they conform to whatever is asked of them? Or do they stand firm in their principles, even when it means refusing what others demand? Almost invariably, those we admire most are those who have demonstrated the strength to draw clear lines, to say, this far and no further. Respect arises from predictability combined with principle. When others know that you will not be swayed by popularity, convenience, or fear, when they understand that your no is not capricious but rooted in consistent values, they may not always like your boundaries, but they will respect them. And more importantly, they will respect you. The person who says yes to everything becomes paradoxically worth nothing. Their agreement is cheap because it is guaranteed. But the person whose yes must be earned, whose agreement represents a genuine choice rather than a reflexive need to please, that person's approval carries weight precisely because they have demonstrated the capacity to withhold it. Perhaps nowhere is the power of refusal more evident than in our relationship with pleasure. We live in what Aldous Huxley presciently described as a pleasure economy, a society designed not to oppress through pain, but to control through comfort. The modern world offers unprecedented access to immediate gratification, entertainment on demand, food engineered for maximum pleasure, social media designed to trigger dopamine with each notification. Yet this abundance of pleasure has not made us happier. Instead, it has created a population increasingly incapable of handling discomfort, increasingly addicted to stimulation, and increasingly unable to pursue long-term satisfaction over short-term reward. The capacity to refuse immediate pleasure represents one of the most powerful predictors of success and fulfillment. Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow experiments demonstrated that children who could delay gratification, who could say no to one marshmallow now to receive two later, showed better outcomes across numerous life measures, from academic achievement to physical health. Jung understood that the authentic self emerges through the integration of opposing forces, what he called the tension of opposites. This includes the tension between immediate pleasure and deeper satisfaction, between the easy path and the meaningful one. Without the capacity to refuse what feels good in the moment, we remain trapped in what Jung would recognize as an infantile state, unable to mature into full selfhood. The person who cannot say no to pleasure becomes paradoxically less capable of experiencing genuine joy. Like any addiction, the pursuit of immediate gratification leads to tolerance, requiring ever greater stimulation to achieve the same effect, while simultaneously diminishing our capacity for deeper, more sustainable forms of happiness. Perhaps the most insidious demand facing modern individuals is the pressure to seek constant social validation. Social media has transformed this natural human tendency into something approaching pathology, creating environments where worth is measured in likes, shares, and followers. The result is a population increasingly dependent on external approval, increasingly willing to sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. Jung would recognize this as a profound spiritual danger. His concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the expectations of others, warned against identifying too strongly with how others see us. When we become unable to distinguish between our public image and our authentic self, we lose touch with what Jung called the soul, the deeper, truer aspect of our being. The courage to refuse validation-seeking behavior, to say no to the desperate chase for likes and approval, represents a crucial step towards psychological freedom. It means recognizing that your worth does not depend on others' assessment of you, that popularity and truth often stand in opposition, and that the path to authentic selfhood frequently requires walking alone. Those who cannot refuse the validation of the crowd become slaves to public opinion, constantly shifting their beliefs, appearance, and behavior to match whatever earns the most approval. They may gain followers, but they lose themselves. In Jung's terms, they sacrifice their soul for their persona, trading depth for surface, authenticity for acceptance. Refusing what others crave often means accepting what others fear. Solitude. To stand apart from the collective, to say no to its values, pleasures, and demands, is to risk isolation. This prospect terrifies most people, driving them back into conformity even when they recognize its emptiness. Yet Jung understood that meaningful individuation requires periods of separation from collective assumptions. Your vision will become clear, he wrote, only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. This awakening demands the courage to withdraw from constant social stimulation, to refuse the noise that drowns out the quieter voice of the authentic self. The capacity to be alone, to say no to constant connection and stimulation, has become increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. Studies show that periods of solitude enhance creativity, deepen self-knowledge, and improve mental health. Yet modern culture treats solitude as a problem to be solved rather than a resource to be cultivated. Those who cannot refuse company, who panic at the prospect of an evening alone, who reach for their phone the moment boredom arises, never develop the inner resources that solitude builds. They remain dependent on external stimulation, external validation, external direction. In refusing solitude, they refuse the very conditions that would allow them to become truly themselves. Saying no is not merely about rejection, it's about selection. The point is not to refuse everything but to refuse purposefully, to develop what Jung might call discriminating consciousness, the capacity to distinguish between what serves your deeper development and what hinders it. Strategic refusal begins with awareness. Before you can effectively say no, you must understand what you're being asked to accept, not just explicitly, but implicitly. Many of the most dangerous demands come disguised as opportunities or obligations. The social gathering that will drain your energy, the promotion that will consume your life, the relationship that requires you to shrink yourself. Each presents itself as a gift while concealing its cost. Effective refusal also requires clarity about your own values and boundaries. What matters most to you? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what remains non-negotiable? Without this clarity, your refusals will seem arbitrary rather than principled, weakening rather than strengthening your position. Perhaps most importantly, strategic refusal requires courage, the willingness to face disapproval, misunderstanding, and even rejection. Jung knew that individuation never comes without cost. To become yourself means disappointing others' expectations, challenging collective assumptions, and sometimes standing alone against the current. When you begin consistently refusing what doesn't serve your authentic development, when you start saying no to distractions, empty pleasures, meaningless social obligations, and the desperate chase for approval, something remarkable happens. You stop being defined by what you consume and start being defined by what you create. You stop being shaped by external demands and start being shaped by internal values. This transformation aligns perfectly with Jung's vision of individuation as a process of becoming more fully yourself. The privilege of a lifetime, he wrote, is to become who you truly are. This becoming is not about adding more possessions, more experiences, more connections. It's about subtraction, removing what isn't truly you to reveal what is. The person who masters the art of refusal develops a kind of gravitational pull. Their yes becomes meaningful precisely because their no is genuine. They no longer chase approval because they no longer need it. They no longer fear missing out because they've defined what actually matters to them. They no longer panic at solitude because they've developed inner resources that make them complete even when alone. This transformation extends beyond the individual to influence others. In a world where most people reflexively say yes to whatever is offered, where consumption, distraction, and validation seeking have become the unquestioned norm, the person who demonstrates the capacity to refuse stands as a powerful example. Their boundaries create space for others to recognize and establish their own. Jung understood that individual transformation ultimately contributes to collective evolution. Each person who develops the courage to refuse what doesn't serve their authentic development helps shift the larger culture toward greater consciousness. Each act of principled refusal creates ripples that extend far beyond the individual. In the end, the capacity to say no, to refuse what others crave, represents one of the most profound expressions of human dignity. It declares that you are not merely a consumer to be targeted, a resource to be exploited, or a void to be filled. It asserts that you have an internal compass that guides your choices, values that transcend momentary desire, and a self that exists independent of others' perceptions. Jung recognized that this dignity is essential to psychological health. Without it, we remain in a state of what he might call unconscious identification with collective values and desires. We think we're making choices when we're merely following programming. We believe we're expressing preferences when we're merely reflecting marketing. The person who cannot say no to what society celebrates, who cannot stand apart from collective obsessions, never fully develops as an individual. They remain, in Jung's terms, undifferentiated from the collective unconscious, their potential selfhood submerged in the homogenizing force of mass culture. But the person who develops the capacity for principled refusal, who can say no to immediate pleasure for deeper satisfaction, no to constant connection for meaningful solitude, no to reflexive consumption for purposeful creation, and no to desperate validation seeking for authentic self-expression, that person achieves what Jung would recognize as the goal of individuation, becoming fully, distinctly themselves. You are what you say no to. Your refusals define you more precisely than your acceptances. What you consistently reject shapes the contours of your character more clearly than what you embrace. In a culture designed to make refusal difficult, where technology, marketing, and social pressure all push toward mindless consumption and reflexive compliance, the simple act of saying no becomes revolutionary. It represents a reclaiming of agency, a declaration of selfhood, and a commitment to conscious living. Jung understood that the most important questions in life cannot be answered by society's ready-made solutions. They require individual wrestling, personal discernment, and the courage to refuse easy answers. "The shoe that fits one person," he wrote, "pinches another. There is no universal recipe for living." To find your own recipe, to become fully yourself, requires developing the capacity to refuse what doesn't fit, even when everyone around you insists it should. It demands the strength to say no to what others crave, not out of spite or superiority, but out of fidelity to your own unique path. In this refusal lies not just psychological health but spiritual freedom, the liberation that comes from recognizing that you are not defined by what you consume, but by what you create, not by what you accept, but by what you consciously reject. You are, in the deepest sense, what you say no to. And in that refusal, paradoxically, you find your most authentic yes,